Hey Waptors, Mr. Lassiter here with you, and in this video we're going to be looking at the Song Dynasty, or if you are watching Netflix's Marco Polo, the Song Dynasty, as they tend to say. I don't know why they speak with British accents in that show, but they do. So let's go ahead and get started looking at this dynasty of China that followed the Tang Dynasty. It rose up at about 960 CE, but there's a lot of stuff going on in China. Actually, after the fall of our Tang Empire, or Tang Dynasty, we see a number of new states emerge in that territory. And this includes the Liao Empire, made up of the Khitan people, and the Tangut Empire. And so these kind of rise up in the northern parts of China. The Liao Empire mainly practicing Mahayana Buddhism, the Tangut Empire practicing Tibetan Buddhism. But the one we're mainly concerned with here is the Song Empire, which is separated into kind of two time periods. The Northern Song time period, when the Liao people controlled the north, and that lasts until about 1126. And then the Southern Song Dynasty, which lasts from about 1127 to 1279. We call this the Southern Song, and the Jin people are in control of the north. The Song Dynasty is especially known for its advancements in technology, and we'll talk about those. So let's talk quickly about the Liao. They had a very strong military. They controlled a large area and mainly allowed locals to keep their own culture and languages. Oftentimes, or for quite some time, they had laid siege to the Song Dynasty and forced them to basically provide tribute, give annual payments in cash and silk in return for continued peace. And this will be a theme that we see throughout the Song Dynasty, which is paying tribute to outsiders to maintain peace in their empire. The Song eventually form an alliance with the group of people known as the Jurchen. And they eventually are able to combine and defeat the Liao Dynasty, or the Liao Empire. The problem was that these Jurchen peoples then proclaimed their own empire, the Jin Empire, and they turn on the Song and drive them out of the north and central China into southern parts of China in 1127. And so this continues the Song reign in southern China, and that's why we call it the Southern Song Empire. We see the capital of the Song Empire move as well. They withdrew to south of the Yellow River, basically, and established their new capital at Hangzhou. Anyway, so again, this Song Dynasty will basically be providing tribute, if not to the Liao, then to the Jin Empire throughout their history. And then later, the Mongols will come and knock it. But one of the longest lasting legacies of the Song Dynasty was their industrialization, their invention, their invention of new technologies. This is probably the closest thing that we see to an industrial revolution before the actual industrial revolution. Great advancements are made in math, science, engineering, astronomy, timekeeping, all these different things. And we're going to look at several of these inventions now. For example, Song China developed efficient ways of iron casting. Production reached levels on par with 18th century Britain. They produced steel weapons, body armor, bridges, and even small buildings that were mainly made of iron. And so this mass production of iron was a major advancement at the time. The Chinese junk ship was China's main ocean-going ship. It allowed Song China to trade very widely. The design was actually copied as far away as Persia. Movable type printing. The Song printing press used this movable type to make printing cheaper. This resulted in the printing of many kinds of informative books and materials Printed books also allowed ideas to spread much more widely. We'll talk about that in a second. Some of these included agricultural techniques. They could spread their ideas. Gunpowder, of course. The Song experimented with uses for gunpowder, including propelling clusters of flying arrows. It was used in close combat, and they launched exploding balls of iron at their enemies. This is kind of a very early version of a handgun. The Chinese invented fractions, or the Song Chinese mathematicians used fractions to first describe the phases of the moon. This led to the development of a very precise calendar and a better understanding of astronomy. And that's not even the half of it. But the magnetic compass is going to be something that will eventually migrate from China to Arabia and then to Europe. They developed a very small form of this magnetic compass that made it suitable for seafaring. This will combine with the invention of the astrolabe to help improve navigation throughout Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean. The mechanical celestial clock of Song created a water-powered clock that told the time of the day of the month, and indicated the movement of the moon and certain stars and planets across the sky. Paper money was pioneered by the Song dynasty. They eventually withdraw the use of paper money when inflation runs wild. The Chinese will try to use paper money several more times, and ultimately, they struggle with it. They kind of issue it and then withdraw it, issue it and withdraw it. But nevertheless, they're one of the first people we see to use this to represent some value of gold or silver. But one of the another long-lasting legacy of the Song dynasty was not just their inventions, but also new ways of thought, or, to better put it this way, a new interpretation of old ways of thought. So Neo-Confucianism comes about in this time. And basically, these are new interpretations of Confucian teachings that become important and influential. Writers such as Zhu Xi, who you see pictured here in the statue of this man, wanted to emphasize the teaching of Confucius, which they believe had been overshadowed by the growth of Taoism and Buddhism in China. If you remember, in the late Tang Dynasty, there was a lot of repression of Buddhism. So people wanted to go back to these Confucian ideals. It emphasized rational, moral, and good human nature, social and moral responsibility to the state, and the growth of wisdom and the development of sages through the study of Confucian principles. Of course, this was going to be aided on by the reprinting of Confucian materials with the movable type press. As such, one of the major changes socially or in civil service occurred with the introduction of Confucian ideals into civil service, or the continued implementation of this. Socially, a military man in China, in Song China, was actually held in lower esteem than a civil man or a servant of the government. Many social standards were adopted from the top two belief systems in China, or philosophies, Buddhism and Confucianism. Civil servants actually would obtain their positions based on how they scored on difficult exams, civil service exams that were based on Confucian thought. And so the wealthy were mainly the people who had the time and the education to be able to spend years studying for these examinations. But this is definitely one of the lasting legacies of the Song dynasty, as civil servants will continue to be valued throughout Chinese history. Going back to the ideas of the technology and the invention of the movable type printing press, this created a widespread and relatively cheap supply of books compared to before. The country of China, the literacy of China increases drastically, and this had some unintended consequences. For example, agriculture was a large Chinese industry and was increasing in size every year. Health was a problem, and overcrowding in cities took hold. And so as people learned to farm better and more and in ways that could produce higher yields, those developments, that technology was then shared with the rest of China in printed books. And so people all over the country could grasp onto these new ideas that were spreading faster than ever and implement them in their own regions. A few other things: the idea of credit was used more in the Song Dynasty. It was known as flying money, if you remember from your reading. And the booming economy spurred economic prosperity, of course, for this dynasty. Women in the Song Dynasty saw their status decline in this period. Again, that kind of starts under the Tang as Buddhism is repressed, and we see it continue in the Song with Neo-Confucianism. Women were entirely subordinated to men, and oftentimes, and they also lost their rights to own and manage property, and remarriage became forbidden during the Song Dynasty. And this is also a time period when we see the practice of foot binding begin to grow. So painfully bound feet became a mandatory status symbol for elite women. Part of this thinking was that if a woman had her feet bound and if she was elite enough, she did not need to work and therefore did not have to have unbound feet to carry out regular tasks like the lower classes. This is not something we would have seen in our farming peasant families, because everyone would have been needed to work. So again, this becomes more of a status symbol in the Song Dynasty. All right, that's it. Sorry I kind of rambled there at the end. Go back through this. If you need any more information, make sure that you hit the major points from our section on the Song Dynasty. I think that's pretty much all you need to know, but let me know if you have any questions. Have a good one.